for the second invitation now. It's really exciting, and I've been thinking a lot about the conversations that we've had so far. And so in preparing sort of this conversation today, one of the things that that struck me was that what you've explained about the Race and Fiction project, about the context of Argentina, its history, and the way that it's dealing or not dealing with racism, I kind of thought there are so many parallels and connections with my work in Switzerland, and maybe more so than with my work in the African context. Which is interesting because, you know, you would think two contexts from the South would be immediately, you know, speaking to each other. They do. But so I thought, okay, let me just maybe give you a little bit of both contexts, a little bit of Swiss projects and a little bit of African sort of context projects. And I'm going to start at the end. So my most recent base is Basel in Switzerland. I came here 2016 for a curatorial residency, which is a whole other story how that happened. But the task or the job or the invitation was to deal with the Swiss art scene, which I knew nothing about. I knew nothing about Switzerland. And so I decided I'm going to just bring my questions and see what happens with them. And the questions are always, they're similar in some ways, and then the answers get specific. So how does a country like Switzerland deal with racism? How does it deal with a diverse society? How does it deal with exclusion? And this includes gender. I don't know if you know this, but Switzerland was very late to let women vote. They were only allowed to vote in 1971, after Turkey, decades after Turkey, and how they negotiate otherness. And I had very few initial contacts, and then quickly the network became bigger. And the interesting thing was that the network was not so much only from the art scene, but very broad. So I spoke to academics, I spoke to people in activism, and we discussed some of these questions. And a core group of those people, I think maybe, I forgot to count it before now, somewhere between 8 and 12 or so, got involved in the project. And it's a very mixed group of people. So I have, maybe I can start sharing my screen so that you have something to run in the background while I'm showing you or telling you what I wanted to talk about. So I'm going to first show you not this, which is not working. Hold on, that's too early. But I wanted to show you this project. Can you still see my screen?
We see you, not your screen.
Okay, so it hasn't worked. Okay, so let's try again. Can you see it now? Okay, so there were a whole bunch of people, and this is the website for the project where you can see everything, because I don't have time to tell you about the whole project. But there were academics like Roy Jain, who was doing a project with a visual artist who's of Indian background and was a refugee from Uganda who ended up in Switzerland in the 70s. There were Swiss performers, there were word artists, there were DJs. So it was very mixed. And it was important for me to have this conversation in a mixed context because I wanted to be able to have a nuanced conversation about the dynamics that is Switzerland at the moment, at least in the Basel context. So one of the things that happened, because there were questions around racism, there were questions around Switzerland in and of itself, this neutral country. But I didn't want to do a project that is sort of making a statement about, you know, I as a foreigner can see how you guys have problems and I'm going to make it only with all of the people that you usually exclude, and this is what that is, but to really try and understand how all of these things came about. And one of the themes that sort of emerged was really around silence and silencing. So the project had this very funny name. Now I just need to go back to my PowerPoint and make it nice and big so you can see it. This is a poster that I made for the exhibition. The project is called Sh, which is the sound of silencing. But the SCH is also the first 3 letters for the German version of Switzerland, Schweiz. It's also the first 3 letters for the German word black, Schwarz. It's the first 3 letters of the German word silencing, Schweigen, and a whole bunch of other things. So the idea was really to think about, you know, this pristine idea of Switzerland, these beautiful white mountains and this untouched snow, this neutral country that never had any colonies, everything's fine, everything works. And then underneath all of that, there's a whole bunch of stuff. And one of the image I took from the internet, it's a mountain range called the Agassiz Horn, and it's named after a natural scientist, a biologist and geographer, I think, called Agassiz. And he was a racist. I mean, I think we can be as clear and as simple as that. He did studies on slaves and the inferiority of Black people. And there was a motion a few years ago where there was a grouping of people here in Switzerland who motioned for this mountain to be renamed after one of the prominent slaves that was featured in his studies. And also he generated a whole bunch of first sort of photographs of slaves. The motion was denied, so that never happened. But it was just an interesting story that I came across in the beginning of the research about the levels of histories untold, and therefore also a whole range of other dynamics. And what I decided is, I will give you the website again later, so because there are many different projects, but the one that deals in a much more frontal way with racism is a project by a word artist called Amina Abdul Kadir, who's Swiss, but she's not white. And you see her there sitting in the background of this image. And I came across her poetry, which initially it was beautiful love poetry. And I thought how amazing that she feels just comfortable to write about whatever she wants to write about. And we met and I said, oh, I find this really interesting, you know, and we talked about some of the questions I brought. And she said, yes, that is so in many ways, but I'm actually currently, this was 2016, I'm really angry. And I do want to do a project about racism in Switzerland because I'm angry. So I said, okay, great, do it. And she proposed a 4-part project. And I'll try to explain it briefly and simply. So the performance starts with her sitting like this, silently. She doesn't talk. There's a recording running with instructions for the audience. And the audience is instructed to write down all kinds of racisms that they have experienced, overheard, that they maybe have themselves. And so initially nothing much happens. So you see a whole lot of people standing like this and they're going, okay. And slowly, also because some of the people from the exhibition space started to engage, she starts collecting and people write down things. And when she feels she has enough, that people have come out enough, she goes to the next station in her performance, which looks like a little stage like this. And here she has a laptop on her lap and she types. And what she types is projected behind her. And she talks to the audience. She still doesn't talk. She types to the audience. And she enters into a conversation where she will read some of the things that people have written down. And she will ask questions. She will maybe share stories. And so slowly, the audience talks and they will start sharing experiences. And what is interesting, of course, is that, you know, the audience is mixed. So some days more, sometimes less. And then someone will say, or she will maybe even write that when she was a child, people would spit at her because she was Black. And then someone in the audience will say, no, this is not possible. That doesn't happen in Switzerland. It's not possible. And if it happens in Switzerland, it doesn't happen in Basel. It happens, you know, in some rural area somewhere else. It's not possible. And so there were a lot of really interesting connections, conversations triggered about what are real experiences of people, what people do not know about, and also these dynamics that Dana and I also addressed in the conversation a while back about the mechanisms of silencing those conversations. So gaslighting, like saying to people, but I think you're over exaggerating. It wasn't meant like this, or maybe it's only you. I have other friends who don't have a problem. Or like I said earlier, it doesn't happen here, it happens elsewhere. And it was interesting because the conversations continued even after the performance. If the performance goes well, meaning that the audience really participates and is honest about racism, in the end, she speaks directly to the people. So she gets emancipated as much as the audience allows her to occupy the space by being honest about issues of race in Switzerland, which are generally denied. This worked really well a few times. And then the one time, I'm trying to be brief because I promised I would look on my watch.
Kadiatou, sorry, would it be okay to scroll a bit up? Because we see, I mean, if there's any images of the show that are there to be seen.
You mean
because we just see she opened a black hole, an audience member at Amina.
Oh no! Oh, you didn't tell me. I was going through my slideshow. Oh no! Okay, wait. Then I'm gonna have to do this differently. I'm so sorry. Thanks for letting me know now. Okay, so I'm going to share.
We really understood the show. So now to see the images, it will work.
No, it's important that you see it. Okay, so you didn't see this either.
That one.
Oh no. Okay, let's start the talk again. That's horrible.
No, don't worry. Okay. You can show the images now.
Okay, so this is when I spoke about the mountain and the natural scientist and the renaming, that's this image, and that was the poster for the show. And that was the title, the SCH. This is Amina when she collects all the writing. This is the audience sort of trying to figure out what is going on and hopefully slowly participating. And when she has enough, she moves to this sort of stage. And when she also starts weighing, she has little marbles, and then she puts for honest statements about racism, she will put marbles into the one side for negative and positive. And so it's a kind of process also of rebalancing by naming it, by uttering it, by negotiating it anew. And this is where she then sits and talks to the audience with her laptop in the background. And because at the one session, there was a conversation, interestingly, between two male activists, two Black male activists, who completely stole her show. So they were trying to be supportive, but what happened, she wasn't talking, and they had a conversation just between the two of them, and the whole audience attention was directed to the two men, and she was lost in her own space. It's a bit of a long story, but I mention it because for two reasons. One, because what was important about that day is also the extra additional aspect when we speak about those issues. It's not just about black and white and this and that. There are so many nuances within all of these conversations, and gender is one of them, which we often don't speak about. So it's not just Black people being heard or not being heard or being looked at and treated in a certain way. Within the groupings, there are certain dynamics, and it was important that that came up in the project, and she then changed the project. So here she is definitely talking. So the last two sessions were much louder and more direct. And I think it had also to do with the fact that she needed to protect herself a little bit, but I'll speak about that in one of the next projects as well. So this is just the website again. It's a simple little blog, but for the other projects that were part of the project and for more pictures about Amina's show, people could go here, and I can also obviously email you that. And one of the other, so this was that initial project. I was meant to stay for 5 months. I'm still here and I'm still doing projects in Switzerland. And one of the things that I continued from Cape Town, where I was before, to here, I was busy in Cape Town with a podcast series where I spoke to artists from different parts of the African continent. And I decided to do a diasporic series about what it means for Black artists to be and work in Europe. And one of those artists I've mentioned also in the last, in the conversation with Dana, Ntando Diallo, she's a South African who lives in Bern. And she also deals with racism in a very, well, I'll show you, then you'll see. So she has 2 alter egos, and I'll just show you a few seconds so you can meet her alter egos. If I get this working, there you go.
For those of you who don't know me, I am Bianca White. I am a quarter Zulu. I am a 5th Khoi Khoi. And I'm a 3rd generation Buremechi. You know, I feel almost here in Liechtenstein. You know, I like blacks. I used to have some of them as friends until my daddy sold them all and bought me a pet dog.
Okay, so I'll stop here and maybe move to the next one because this
For those of you who
oh, sorry. No, okay. So Ntando is someone who works in these 2, well, she has several characters. The white-faced character is called Bianca White. And she's crass. I mean, all of her racisms, she plays a funny, I mean, you don't always know whether to laugh or not. She's funny, she's also painful in many ways. And she utters in a very direct way a lot of the kinds of racisms that are out there, but that sometimes are packaged more subtle. And she puts them and you get them one time in a very brutal way somehow. And then the other character is sort of the nemesis of Bianca White. Her name is Vera Black. And she is sort of the angry Black woman. And what's interesting about Ntando's work is a bunch of things. The one is that she often in her performances transforms. So the audience is challenged to figure out throughout the performance whether they are an ally or whether they are implicated. It's not always clear to the audience what role they play. Is it okay to laugh about racism? Is it what, they don't know how to react oftentimes. And because Ntando sometimes starts as Bianca White and at some point takes the makeup off and then she is herself, there is also a very strange metamorphosis that goes on, and it can be quite a disorienting experience for an audience. And the other important thing, of course, is that this work is for a Swiss or European audience. She wouldn't do the same piece necessarily like this in South Africa, for example, because the issues are different. And the other reason why I wanted to show her or a little bit of her work briefly, there is more of the trailers online, and she's obviously done other stuff, but part of what we have spoken about also is that in a way it becomes sometimes very difficult for someone like her as a Black actress with emphasis on actress in a place like this to be very free with the kind of work she might like to do besides doing this educational work on racism. And that is something that can become a little bit oppressive in and of itself almost, because it limits you also artistically. She could do all kinds of other things as well. And there's almost like a, I don't know if I'm finding the right word now, but there is an educational work that she performs literally, but it's difficult work because it is, it's not always easy to do. It's also painful to do because you're dealing with a lot of very personal issues. And also you're often quite exposed and vulnerable because usually she has different shows now where she performs with other people, but oftentimes it's a solo act. And it means that all of these other dynamics that were mentioned in the conversation with Dana and which I referred to earlier on, you become a little bit of a target. And so this for me was an important point to make before I sort of slowly move to the African context. it's part of the same podcast, Artists on Africa. But this next person is based in Cape Town. He's a filmmaker called Kurt Ordison. And he always says he makes home movies. A lot of the feature films that he's made are literally stories about family members who have grown up during apartheid, or, you know, not just family like uncles and others. And those stories are told as the stories of an entire community, because many other people have very similar stories. And I just wanted, this is a 1-minute little clip from the interview that we did with him. Can't remember how many years ago now. It's not recent. But this is how he sort of speaks about why he does what he does and what's important.
I'm from a community, right? I'm from Mitchell's Plain, on the Cape Flats, you know. Grew up in a working class setting, you know. That's where I come so naturally, right? Whatever I'm going to do, whatever I was going to end up doing was going to be community orientated and for the community to understand what I'm trying to put out there, right? So first and foremost, take the community story in consideration and let them be the narrator. So, you know, if you look at ethnographic cinema, right, during the colonial era, they told your story. So you were always the victim, right? So my objective and my mission, right, is to kind of flip that psyche. Again, it's taking ownership. This is our story, our narrative, and we'll do it. We're not going to allow another person from England or whatever, some NGO to come through. We'll make it ourselves.
That's it. So the point about telling own stories is kind of why I wanted to show in the work that I've done with my friend Dominique Malaquet, who's a scholar and writer based in Paris. We started 2008 with the SPARK project, the Space for Pan-African Research, Creation and Knowledge. And I mean, it was not the only and the main thing, but part of what the work was about was also to sort of disrupt and what's another good word? To sort of challenge and produce something counter in collaboration with other people against this sort of mono narrative about things that one thinks of when one thinks Africa: poverty, disease, war, corruption, dictators, and so on and so forth. And all of these other stories are just sort of blended out. And of course, there's a reason for that, because there's something in that is perpetuating a very particular kind of hierarchy that has to do with colonialism, and that certainly has to do with racism as well. And I think what's interesting and important in the work and the projects that we've been involved with is also to say, and this is for me a fundamental difference when I look at the sort of Swiss context and some of what I've heard about what you have told me so far, and about some of the works in the African context, is the one thing is to take back those stories and sort of go, okay, stop. This gaze, this colonial gaze, this sort of repeating of a certain kind of inferiority and so on and so forth, stop. That has to stop. We're also no longer, and this is maybe the first thing I should have said, there isn't the question whether racism exists or not. That is not even on the table. Nobody needs to convince anyone of that. It's clear, you know, it's like, that's done. So now the question is, okay, what are we going to do about that? First of all, there's a lot of Black people there, so we tell our own stories. And the important thing also, I think, is that those stories are not necessarily told to a white audience or to convince the master, if you want to use Audre Lorde's reference. It's not to convince anybody else. Those stories are for the communities. They're for us, for them, and they're also increasingly more exchanges that are local, that are regional, that are continent-wide. So the audience, the reference point is not Europe, it's not necessarily whatever that means then white people, but it is really something that is from and for who's there. And I think that's an important difference. That doesn't mean that there isn't also resistance that is very directly also challenging structural issues. Like I'm thinking, for example, and I think we spoke about this, Dana and I, briefly as well. In South Africa, a number of years ago, there was a countrywide movement that became known and communicated with each other under the hashtag fees must fall, fees meaning the money paid for the university. But there were nationwide calls to decolonize universities, to make, to change the curriculum, to make the curriculum so that it makes sense for now, given what is said, to remove monuments that are representing, perpetuating, and still celebrating in some way a colonial history of a country that has officially and allegedly parted those ways, or with that kind of history and its inheritance, and to make it accessible also financially. So those movements obviously still exist and should and must. And the kind of work that needs to sort of run in parallel is also a sort of shifting maybe or repositioning of the center of the point of enunciation, so that not everything is always the center, the importance, the thing that is always either reacted to or attacked. Sometimes you take it out. You focus on what else there is, because there are many stories, and there is a whole lot of healing and refinding and reweaving and retelling that needs to actually take place because of the erasures that have taken place over history. And Melina, of course, I'm going completely overboard with my time. My stopwatch confirms it. But maybe just a last thing to say for me, sort of for the next projects that I'm thinking, or that I'm busy with, they've kind of always been like that. I do, for myself, not so much make projects that are educational in the sense that they have very obvious kinds of, okay, let me see if I can say this sentence nicely. The issues around racism, around gender, around equality, and all kinds of other things, they're always there. But I want to be able, because for me, that is kind of the next step that needs to happen, so that we stop only being in this kind of reaction to things, is to create new normals, new sort of things that don't need to be justified all the time. So I want to do, and I do projects, for instance, where a woman, recently, this happened last month, where an artist from India and a Black artist based here in Basel with, she's from Canada originally, they come together and they do a project about observation, and it all evolves around Saturn. And the one is an amateur astronomer and a visual artist, and the other one makes sound. And it's not a gender feminist project as such, it's not a Black project as such. It's kind of trying to open the spaces up also where things can be looked at as normal without them being challenged, without being questioned. So that there was a conversation in the context of that particular project also, where the one woman asked me before the project, are all the people involved in this people of color? And I said, yes, with the exception of one. And she said, it's the first time that I'm being invited to do a project where I don't have to speak about or regurgitate and go through the pain again of, as a Black queer person. I can just be me, and I can talk about other things I also want to talk about, and that helps me, and I think that also does something to the audience. And that other layer, as I said, is always there, but it's not made exclusive, and it's not made the only target that then again erases all kinds of other things that should have a lot more space, in my opinion, for things to really change. I think maybe I should stop here, Melly. Otherwise I'm going to go on for another 20 minutes.
I think actually, it's so generous from you. You know, we could continue with this forever, but I think what you've just said, it's so connected to the talk that, there has been before this, speaking in the future, that actually a very well-known Argentinian filmmaker, she spoke with members of Identidad Marrón. So I think to leave this closing in the air, I think it's great.
Okay, wonderful. Because I'm happy to share more links. We can put them with the talk on the website because there are other amazing artists to see. I want to maybe just while we say goodbye, I don't know, you can't see it if anyways. I'll show you privately because this was very selective, but I had to be for time. But there are so many great artists who are doing wonderful things.
What we can do is in the editing, at the end, the last, before the logos and all the formal stuff, we can put a slide that can last for a few seconds where we share all these websites, and because people can always put stop, so they can take note of this and take with themselves. This is the main thing, that we are able, particularly for us in Argentina, to get to know and to get in contact with our colleagues in the South, and of course, people that are dealing with these subjects in their own way. So this would be the key thing. Okay, so great. All in all, once again, Kadiatou, from all my heart, thank you so much for this. It has been a great 2 months work together. I'm emotional.
2 months, oh my God.
We've worked a lot together, and I have goosebumps. So yes, see you in Switzerland for sure.
I'd like it very much.
And if not, here we are.
It was interesting to have to think about it this way, kind of blindly, because Argentina is also still so abstract, but I hope that the conversations continue. And yeah, I'd love that very much, actually. It's going to be interesting. Yeah, let me stop talking. I always talk too much. But it's been really great, and I'm very grateful for the invitation, and I hope it made sense. So
a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
Thank you.